Good afternoon and welcome to the Break the Bias in Communications webinar hosted by IBC Toronto in honor of International Women's Day. My name is Michael Blackburn and I'm the Executive Vice President of IBC Toronto, and I identify with the pronouns he and him. Before we begin our webinar today, IBC Toronto acknowledges the land we are hosting this virtual event from is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I would also like to acknowledge the current conflict in Ukraine, which is causing a humanitarian crisis with far-reaching implications. We stand together to support our colleagues, clients, friends, and family who have been deeply impacted. Please note that today's session is being recorded. To ensure an inclusive experience for everyone, closed captioning is available by clicking the closed captioning button at the bottom of your screen. While we wait for others to join, I wanted to note that IBC Toronto is proud to be the largest chapter of the International Association of Business Communicators worldwide, and is excited to be celebrating its 80th anniversary in 2022. IBC Toronto supports our community of business communication professionals with innovative thinking, shared best practices, in-depth learning, and career guidance. And March actually marks membership month. So if you join or renew your membership in March, you will get a 20% discount. And we invite you to go to toronto.ibc.to for more information. I'm personally very excited for today's session. It's going to be a great one. We'll be hearing from 5 great speakers, 4 of whom are on IBC Toronto's Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Committee. The IDEA Committee is a group of passionate and dedicated volunteers whose mission is to provide IBC Toronto's members with diverse, inclusive opportunities and resources and to drive recommendations to IBC Toronto's Board of Directors, guided by its Ideas for Belonging IDEA recommendation report. We invite you to live tweet today using hashtag BreakTheBiasTO and by tagging IBC Toronto. I encourage you to enter your questions into the chat and we will do our best to answer as many of them as possible at the end of the session. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mark John Stewart, to kick things off. Mark is Managing Director at Wentworth Strategy Group and an advisor and strategist for profit, not-for-profit, and public sector organizations across the globe. He is also lead instructor in strategic management with the McMaster Syracuse Master of Communications Management Program. Thank you for moderating our panel today, Mark, and I'm going to turn things over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael, and really pleased to be here with everybody today, all the members of IBC Toronto and soon-to-be members if you're not. It'll come to no surprise to everyone for me to say that, we are living in turbulent times for many reasons right now. And for me, reflecting upon that, I think, shows us that we have even more of an imperative than ever to be thinking about our leadership as professionals and communicators and doing this in a thoughtful manner and being reflective and, to be thinking about the world that we're helping to co-create. And in particular today on International Women's Day, the world that we're creating together for women. As a male participating in this event, I'm excited to be here in the spirit of allyship, today and every day, working towards these aims. And one of my reflections over the past few years on International Women's Day has been, while obviously the day is centered around women, one of the big emerging themes has been intersectionality. And as Michael mentioned, our panelists today are members of the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Committee with IBC Toronto. And we've begun expanding kind of the range and scope of things that we're acknowledging and confronting as society, which I think is very important. My personal experience as a consultant, I'm seeing my clients having an expanding willingness to talk about these broad themes, the businesses they're creating, the organizations they're leading. It's not just about business strategy anymore. It's about how do we create good organizations doing well for the world and considering all these themes. And even, the course I teach and the program I teach in, hopefully we'll have a few of you students one day, the Master of Communications Management Program. We've really expanded our conversation as well. to take a values-based approach to communications in business. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panelists today who have expertise in their different areas on these related themes. So on that note, it's my pleasure to introduce them. Krista Henry is a Jamaican communications specialist at the University of Waterloo and chair of IABC Toronto's IDEA Committee. We have Loretta Lamb with us. She's the president of Focus Communications and director of advocacy and collaboration for the IDEA Committee. Pamela Bishop Byers is the regional communications manager, Indigenous Nuclear Waste Management Organization, also a member of the committee. And last but certainly not least, we have Matissa Hamel-Nellis. She's the vice president of communications at Able Docs and director of communications for the IDEA Committee. So an exceptional panel. As we were prepping, we discussed how this could easily be a 2-3 hour session. And unfortunately, we only have an hour together today. So I look forward to some fascinating insights. And with that, I will kind of jump right into our conversation and take things from there. So I think, Krista, I'm gonna direct the first question your way. So we are here for International Women's Day. I think it's fair to say that in Canada, we've been continuing to dive deeper and continue the very unique journeys and circumstances of women and people more broadly. So as we work together to advance outcomes and opportunities for women in our society, how do you suggest we approach this theme of intersectionality and people's unique identities and perspectives and points of departure?
Great question, and thank you, Mark, and happy International Women's Day to everyone present today. In terms of intersectionality, it's a good lens to look through in terms of the fight for equity is often multi-layered. An intersectional approach shows the way that people's identities overlap and create differing experiences of discrimination. And for women, there are varying levels based not only on gender. For example, myself, I am an immigrant, mixed race, cisgendered, abled woman. My experience will always be different from everyone else on this panel, as with everyone else. So true equity really means recognizing and meeting women's diverse needs where we are at the moment. And that involves listening and learning, getting curious, holding spaces for all women to use their voices. It means debiasing systems and processes. And this is also a multifaceted approach, including training, leadership opportunities, mentorship, the way that we recruit in our organization and fund diverse women's organizations, groups, and movements, holding space for employee resources groups in our organizations for women. Something that we can all understand as communicators is using inclusive communications, using inclusive language when it comes to women, and understanding that we are not all the same and that we identify in different ways, and that you have to approach us in different ways and understand us. So that we need to consider people's multiple identities and the different things that impact us. When I think about it, it's almost like a relay in sprint, for example. Like we reach one leg that we have reached further in when it comes to racialized women, but then we have to pass the baton on to people who have disabilities. Then we have to pass the baton on to other women who may experience class issues, and because of that may experience, various levels of discrimination. And so we really have to be less performative and focus more on action for women. The better our understanding of these issues and the way that we face them is that we're able to offer support and be an ally to women who have different and multiple personalities.
Excellent, thank you, Krista. And I think very well said. And the one thing that makes me feel hopeful is the fact that we are acknowledging, right, and starting to have these conversations on a deeper level. I'm glad that people like you and our other panelists are on the task, because as we continue to look at things closer, we start to uncover all the different nuances and complexities, and the leadership of people like the IDEA Committee is so important in making that progress. So thank you for that. And to all the attendees, we will have a Q&A as mentioned at the end. So please, if you have any further thoughts that are prompted from the responses by our panelists, please hold those and bring them up as questions after to dig into a little bit more. So thank you, Krista. Loretta, I'm going to turn your way. You are a professional consultant, and equity, diversity, inclusion. I mean, these themes have always existed. They're not new conceptually, but they've been quickly evolving as an area of focus in the professional world, right? In your experience, are there any notable successes or outcomes that you can share with us that were a result of activities or initiatives that are best practices that we can learn from, that you've been working on in your professional domain? And I know in particular, you have extensive experience when it comes to initiatives related to immigrants, racialized groups, and individuals. So maybe you can touch on that as well.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mark. I'm also like a first generation immigrant and woman of color, and definitely I have a different experience than other panelists here. And I think that unconscious bias is probably one of the major barriers to a lot of, in terms of career growth for a lot of like cultural and racial minorities, especially for immigrants. And don't forget that Canada is actually a nation of immigrants. It has been, and it will continue to be. A lot of more companies are looking at how they can actually embrace immigrants into their workforce more efficiently and effectively. And for more than 25 years, I worked with a lot of like major brands and corporations on diversity marketing communications. and the good news is I'm gradually seeing more women leaders in the leadership role, especially in the communication industry and sector. But the bad news is I think that we still have to catch up on in terms of diversity at the senior management level for women and also for the diverse minorities. So I just want to use some numbers. According to a recent study last year by Canadian Marketing Association, 52% of the industry respondents say that they don't see members of BIPOC communities rise to senior management. And 60% say that these companies, Canadian companies, prefer to work with people who has Canadian experience. That kind of exclude the immigrants from the circle. And this is dangerous. And based on my experience, it is interesting that I see organizations with diverse leaders, like top leaders with diverse backgrounds, actually perform better in building a diverse and inclusive and equitable work culture. And as a result, they actually become more competitive and better perform. And I just want to share an example because I think that you mentioned about that best practice. And one of my clients, PepsiCo, has been my client for 20 years. And I remember the day one when I walked into the office, is predominantly the senior positions are held by male, white. But I think until 2006, that's actually a bold move by PepsiCo. They hired the first woman CEO, Indra Nooyi. Not only she is a woman, but she is also a person of color, and she is an immigrant. And it's actually a very brave decision and a smart decision because the first time women's and minorities perspectives are brought to the C-suite and the boardroom table. This is very unusual. And I would like to see that happen more and more because from my experience with PepsiCo, Indra actually introduced many innovations at PepsiCo, including like sustainable food and beverage brands, creating highly inclusive and diverse workforce. And also when they engaged me as their multicultural marketing communication consultant, I worked with the management team to build, to renew their hiring practice so that they're making their job opportunities accessible by diverse communities and people of color. And more women as well as visible minority were promoted to senior positions. And in addition, they also introduced like diversity, inclusion, and equity to their vendors, their marketing, and their distribution channels. And they established various ethnic advisory councils and employee affinity groups in the US and Canada. As a result, they have better employee retention and better innovations, and also stronger brand affinity and equity. I think hence removing unconscious bias is a very important step to building a diverse and inclusive work culture and a strong and competitive organization.
Really interesting. Thank you, Loretta. And, we start off this conversation kind of talking about our moral imperative, but I really like and what, you do, but what you've spoken to us about today is layering in, the business case as well. Data and evidence shows that moving in this direction is beneficial for not only society, but for organizations as well. And you've also reiterated that we can't just assume things are going to go in that direction. I mean, we have to take very intentional and proactive steps to get there, but knowing that moving in that direction is well supported by, doing the right thing, but also making a case for why it's going to continue to help us progress. So I appreciate that, Loretta. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn things over to Pamela. Last year, September 30th, I was really pleased personally to see what I felt was the most widespread level of acknowledgement for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. With that being said, we of course have a very long way to go in terms of pursuing reconciliation and addressing impacts of colonization. So I think on International Women's Day in particular, it's important that we acknowledge our collective national tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women. When it comes to truth and reconciliation with First Nations in Canada, Pamela, what do you see as our role and responsibility as organizations, leaders, as communications professionals?
Thank you, Mark. I'll just start by saying that my pronouns are her and them. And I am blessed enough to work at an organization where our CEO is a woman. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization has put a lot of work into reconciliation, and a lot of that has to do and relate to its commitment to understanding the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to actions that came out in 2015. So when we're thinking about, what can we do as communicators when it comes to something like the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls human rights crisis, it's really educating ourselves and recognizing that when we're talking about reconciliation, it's truly about addressing the impacts of colonization. And part of that is understanding that Indigenous women and girls, even though they constitute less than 5% of the Canadian female population, represent over 16% of those females that have been murdered. And that statistic does not account for those Indigenous women and girls that have gone missing. And communities live in grief of memory of them every day. So again, thinking about Indigenous women and girls, for far too long in Canada, they've been publicly devalued or ignored. People's general perceptions have truly been shaped by harmful colonial stereotypes. And so as communicators, I really encourage everyone that's on the line to think about the Break the Bias pledge of this year and think of how we can support and forge positive visibility for Indigenous women and girls. So what does that look like? It's important to raise awareness. And 4 things I thought of really trying to think of like action items coming into this is, if you're not familiar with Red Dress Day that happens on May 5th, please Google it and think about how you can recognize this day either in your workplace or in your home. Another way is to familiarize yourself with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final reports, 94 calls to action. Specifically, call to action number 92 is directed to the private and corporate sector. And it's really interesting language in it that you can use as a communicator when presenting the case to your senior leaders, and why it's important to take into account Indigenous peoples with your communications plans and strategies. Additionally, I think it's important when thinking about action about our role of facilitating conversations and identifying new ways to work with Indigenous women to make sure their voices are heard. So what does that look like? Hiring Indigenous-led communications agencies, graphic designers, making sure they take central role in focus groups that we host. And the last thing I would say is just make sure that we learn as much about Indigenous brilliance and success as we do about their suffering and trauma. Suffering and trauma is something that we've been, as you said, making headline and front page news. But when it comes to Indigenous people, their culture, their spirit, all of those things is really what makes them the type of demographic that is completely inspiring, and I'm blessed to work and honored to spend time with. And some Instagram handles I'd suggest you look at is M. Reed Designs, creates amazing beadwork and dolls, or follow hashtag Indigenous Sovereignty for more stuff there. So thank you, and really happy to be participating in this conversation.
Thank you for that, Pamela, and just kind of tying together some of those themes of proactivity. I appreciate that you given us here in our audience some very specific direction to continue this learning. And I think for many people, if not most people in Canada, there is a lack of understanding and awareness of the very unique context of Indigenous nations and individuals, and agreements and responsibilities that we have to live up to what we've set out as our collective responsibility in terms of the calls to action and things like that. So thank you for that. And yourself, Pamela, and others, I'm sure the panel will be happy to follow up if people have any more specific inquiries. Not every organization is fortunate enough to have Indigenous leadership on staff and communications role. So as communicators look to increase their understanding and learning, I'm sure the door is open to engage our panelists for further support on that. I'm going to turn over to Matisse. We've had some really interesting conversations about the fact that sometimes when we're talking about equity, diversity, inclusion related themes, we tend to focus on specific topics, often race or ethnicity. And one of the topics that we feel often doesn't get enough attention is accessibility. From my perspective, our collective efforts to build a more just and inclusive society for people with disabilities are still very far from sufficient. We have a long way to go. Even as Krista mentioned in her opening remarks, we need to consider things on a more granular level. So Matisse, as professional communicators, what is our role and our opportunity in advancing accessibility?
That's a great question. Thank you so much, Mark. I think right off the bat, as communicators, it's time to change the vernacular that we use. So with that in mind, we tend to refer to inclusion, diversity, and equity, or EDI or IDE, or whatever variation of that. And accessibility tends to be an afterthought. When we do that, we tend to forget about the needs of people with disabilities right off the bat. So instead of them being part of that planning process and accessibility being woven into every step of the journey as communicators, it tends to be left as, oh, we've completed a project and now we need to make it accessible. And typically what tends to happen is that there's an expense to it because it wasn't thought throughout the project. And it just makes for, from a corporate standpoint, well, that's going to hurt our bottom line. But from a social responsibility standpoint, you are essentially saying to people with disabilities who use especially assistive technology, they're not welcome. And in particular, when we're looking at women who have a disability and who are using this assistive technology, we are already putting up these barriers for them to either enter the workforce or even proceed and be promoted throughout their careers because they don't have access to information. And access to information is a human right. It's not a nice to have, it's a human right. So when we're talking about accessibility and how that plays into what we do as communicators, it's vital. It should be part of our everyday practices. And that can be concerning to some when they say, but I don't know what accessibility means as a communicator. Typically, people think of accessibility as ramps or as Braille on signage, but it's so much more, especially in a digital landscape that we live in. Simple steps like adding camel case to hashtags that are multiple words makes your content online more accessible. Ensuring your documents are accessible. So as simple as using your styles pane in a Word document will add headings properly into a document, which allows for easier navigation for somebody using a screen reader. There are very simple things that people can do right off the bat to help escalate where they are on their accessibility journey. And it's not a matter of you having to be fully accessible right away. That's, sure, that's the dream, but we have to also be realistic. Putting yourself on a path and walking through the journey and saying, okay, what's our low-hanging fruit? What can we easily do to become accessible step by step can definitely help as communicators ensure that what we're promoting and what we're trying to do is to be accessible. And you can't have accessibility without inclusion, and you can't have inclusion without accessibility. It's similar to saying, you're having a dance party and you're inviting everybody, but when you get there, there's no ramp if you're in a wheelchair to get into the party. You're inclusive because you've invited everybody, but you're not accessible. The other way around is you invite certain people to the party and you have ramps and Braille and large print and forms and all that stuff. So you're accessible, but you're not inclusive. So people tend to forget that connection between inclusion and diversity, equity, along with accessibility, because you can't have one without the other. They all work together in a similar way. So I think as communicators, asking the questions, not being afraid to say, okay, what is accessibility as a communicator? And knowing that it's okay to ask. For us who are in the accessibility realm, we love when people ask because we can educate. And once we educate, more people become more accessible, more content becomes available, and information isn't hidden or unavailable to everybody. And that's the end goal as communicators. We want our message and our content to be available to everyone. So by incorporating accessibility, you're able to do so.
Thank you, Matisse. I appreciate your passion and advocacy. And one of the beautiful things I've learned engaging more with the topic of accessibility is when you make things more accessible, I mean, it doesn't take away from anybody else. It literally enhances it and makes, by definition, the word accessible to everybody. So, it's a great net positive. And I appreciate the fact that, yourself and your colleagues are making a point to keep it top of the agenda for all of us and to be thoughtful about the process. I'll use the word design, as people think of accessibility. To your point, they often think of the physical element of design, but communications, I mean, the base of communicating is to help people understand things, right? So something like accessibility is actually a completely fundamental concept to communications. As communicators, our goal is to have everybody, as much as possible, our audiences, understand things. So accessible design and communication practices is unquestionably, at its core. And, I thank you for your advocacy and encouraging all of us to continue thinking about that as we continue our work as communicators. I want to ask one specific question. I'm going to turn back to Krista. According to the federal government, women in Canada's workforce earn approximately 77 cents for every dollar men make. And, at the specific point in time, we're continuing to deal with the impacts of COVID-19. Women also suffered more severe and longer lasting economic losses than men during the pandemic, according to StatsCan and other reports. What are some practical solutions that organizations can take to address pay equity?
It's a great question. And as we talked about an intersectional lens, I'd like to share some stats from StatsCan, in that the gap is wider for women who are Indigenous, so that's 65 cents to the dollar. Women living with a disability, 54 cents to a dollar. Racialized women, 67 cents to a dollar. And newcomers to Canada, 71 cents for a dollar. I remember reading a report that it will take over 100 years for women to receive pay equity in Canada. That will not even be in my generation. It might not be in the generation of my child if I had a female child. So, I mean, this is something that we don't often talk about very often, but we do need to face that this is a barrier and a substantial barrier for women. And when it comes to solutions, I mean, a lot of it comes down to policy work, comprehensive action designed to level the playing field. For example, in 2018, Iceland introduced the first policy in the world that requires companies and institutions with more than 25 employees to prove that they pay men and women equally, because we need equal pay for equal work. Some of the other successful solutions that other countries are doing, for example, are equal paternity leave, because the idea in the workplace is that women are the center of the home. And yes, that is true in a lot of cultures and is true for some families. But we need to make it even where men can take the same paternity leave, giving women the opportunity to go back to work if they choose to go back to earlier, to pursue their careers, to finish projects or finish the trajectory that they were on when they became pregnant. To even have organizational gender parity. And I think this is especially important for industries that are mostly male focused. There's still a lot of gender parity that needs to happen for women in STEM, women in manufacturing, for example, where it's equally 50% women and equally 50% men for those that identify whose gender is binary. A lot of it also comes down to mentorship and leadership. I mean, in communications, we do know that there are an overwhelming amount of women in the industry, but when it comes to the C-suite, there are not a lot of women in leadership. And we do need those leadership opportunities, and companies need to set goals and targets that are visible on their websites for their leadership teams, because they need to be held accountable as well. Mentorship and support opportunities, future leader programs, ERGs, sponsors, the whole gamut of it. And a lot of it also comes down to a simple culture reset to empower women in the environment. Remember, a coworker of mine had said that, it's so much easier for a man to ask for a raise when it comes to negotiating their contracts than it is for a woman, because we're not really taught to talk up like that. We're not really taught to talk about finances, to talk about our worth in the workplace. And so I think that it comes down to culturally resetting ourselves and the way that we were socialized growing up as well. And I think these are some of the simple things that can be done. Probably not quite as simple, but it can be done realistically today.
Excellent. Thank you, Krista. And yeah, ask for some practical solutions, and there's a long list there. So I think, what you've reiterated here and everybody on this panel and their responses is we can definitely make progress on these themes and topics. And I appreciate giving you some of the recent historical context and how we've made some progress and ways that we can continue to move forward. I also want to say I'm very impressed by the punctuality of this panel. We're right on time, so doing very well, packing so much insight into this time frame. So I'm going to turn over to kind of hear a kind of closing comment from everybody, but I'll frame things up in terms of shaping up the question. So as some of you mentioned, the theme of this year is breaking the bias. So I'll invite everybody to share a closing perspective, but in particular, and in considering the challenges facing women and intersectionality, I'm hoping everybody can reflect on how we address bias and how we support equity-seeking groups, whether those with accessibility needs, BIPOC, LGBTQ2S, new immigrants. What is our role and responsibility as organizations, as leaders, as communications professionals in supporting these groups and breaking the bias? I'd like to hear everyone's closing comments and a reflection on that statement. So Loretta, I'll turn over to you first.
Sure. I really love the solutions offered by Krista, but I think that based on my experience working with the C-suite and also a lot of the management level people, I would say that it's a lack of education and awareness, and corporations should actually work harder in bringing up the awareness of what can be done and be aware of the unconscious bias and counter those and kind of dissolve those bias through education training and also through conversation. As a communicator, professional communicator, I think we can actually stimulate the talk, the conversation, the dialogue by sharing stories. Because like one of my clients, actually, they're very, very good at actually profiling their successful employees of diverse cultures, whether it's disability, disabled employee or LGBTQT or, person of color. So they're able to profile their success in their job and actually acknowledge their contribution to the company. In this case, then actually this kind of opened the eyes and ears and mind of the other employees and the other stakeholders at the company. So they'd be more like interested to learn about like how they can also play a part in countering unconscious bias and make it more inclusive and diverse and also equitable workplace and work culture. So this is something that I really like to stress on is as a communicator, you can actually build into your communication plan to do that. The other thing I want to raise the awareness is Canada is a country of immigrant. By 2030, 1 in 3 in the workforce will be foreign born. If companies and organization leaders do not prepare for that and manage well and now, they will be left behind, and also they will have a talent shortage because people, if they don't feel inclusive environment, if they don't get acknowledged, they will leave the company. They will leave to your competitors who are doing it right. So don't blame it on the shortage of talent if you're not doing your job well.
Thank you, Loretta, and very well said. And I'll underscore a reference you kept making, which is the potential and the power of communicators to influence how all this is happening. I mean, shaping narrative, shaping perspective, helping understanding is something very much within our wheelhouse. So a message of empowerment as well. So thank you for that, Loretta. Matisse, I'll turn over to you for your reflections and comments.
Thank you. I think as communicators, walking the talk, we say we're inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible. Let's walk that talk. Let's show that that is exactly how we're doing it. I think asking questions is key. At the end of the day, we don't learn things without asking questions and without researching and talking to people who know more insights on different areas, particularly around the concept of idea. So I think for us to support our organizations and our leaders, we have to sort of be at the forefront of asking those questions, getting that knowledge and sharing it and teaching on how do we walk this talk. From an accessibility standpoint, for a company to say we're inclusive and then having your website be inaccessible, you're not really walking your talk. but ensuring that you're making those steps forward, having an accessibility statement that acknowledges, hey, this is what we're working on. We understand these are our deficits and we're working on making them, and acknowledging that we're in the process and on this journey. That speaks volumes to a community that is only growing. At this time, 15% of the Canadian population has a disability of some form, and that's only going to double as the population ages. So it's keeping that in mind and asking those questions and not being afraid to ask those questions that I think from our bias of the unknown and our and not realizing that it's okay to ask questions, that can hinder us in the long run. So being open and aware of not knowing something, but okay to ask the question, that you're not going to be ridiculed or thought less than. Instead, you're going to be applauded and appreciated for actually taking that step forward to say, we acknowledge we're weak in this area. How can we improve to be more inclusive and accessible going forward? I think that is key as communicators.
Thanks, Matisse. And as I'm listening to you, you know, I'm sitting here reflecting. A lot of times people are inclined to delegate leadership to the senior most levels of an organization, but everything I'm hearing you say there, it's anything any of us can do at any level, right, is to step up and to take that a level of initiative. And you know, it's something that's likely going to, you know, be positively received if an organization is trying to figure out how to make progress in a certain area. And, you know, we are the ones stepping up as communicators to help lead that. And to Loretta's initial points, I think we're well positioned to do so based on our area of expertise. So thank you for that response. Pamela, over to you.
I just want to acknowledge the powerful words circulating in the room. I was sitting here taking notes and thinking, oh gosh, she's going to, oh, she just sort of, oh, and I think that's the great thing of finding ways to surround ourselves with people that inspire us. So that's what I love about volunteering and being part of IABC's IDEA committee, is it's really carving out some personal time to work with other people that are just as passionate and focused on creating real change as I am. You know, my interest or life passion is really finding ways to support Indigenous people and Indigenous culture. But with that said, you know, I think, Mark, the way you opened the conversation and the beginning of this panel was brilliant, because you spoke of allyship. And truly, my takeaway is, you know, we can't get anywhere without allyship and real and authentic partnership with those people who we're either representing or holding the door open for, thinking back to the visual of the relay race as well, right? So, you know, on this International Women's Day, I will call out and say on LinkedIn, I saw a lot of really inspiring women posting about it. I only saw one male colleague post about it, Mitch Thompson. I saw your post. Thank you for posting. Again, not to say men are not, but it's really important for us, if we are going to achieve equity at any point, that the participation of our male allies does go farther than a LinkedIn post, but they are there and they're accepting what can be sometimes difficult and challenging conversations in the spirit of true allyship and authentic partnership. So thank you for opening again the panel in such authentic way, Mark, and to all my fellow panelists, you inspire me, and it's an honor each and every day that I get to know you better and the different causes that you hold close to your hearts. Thank you.
Well said, Pamela, and shout out to Mitch, role model for others. And since you brought it up, I'll give a third-party plug for the IDEA committee. So I'm not a member of the committee, but the panelists are, and I've had the opportunity to engage with them through this exercise. And I've been very impressed, as I'm sure you were, just listening to everybody. And I think for all of us, you know, we may be asking around these topics that came up today, what is our platform? How do we engage with them? Because sometimes our roles or jobs put them on our plate, but sometimes they don't, you know, and we have to figure out where do we start from and how do we participate. The IDEA committee is a great place. So if you're interested in participating with IABC or the committee in particular, certainly encourage you to do that, especially after hearing, you know, the wisdom today that's resident within the committee. So I think last word is over to you, Krista.
Thanks, Mark. I think it really echoes back to what everyone else said. And I think a lot of it comes down to what communicators do best, which is communicating and speaking about it we need to engage in dialogue that confronts these biases. I know that Canadian society is normally considered to be very polite, but sometimes we need to step on toes. Sometimes we need to get our voice heard, because advocates in the past, we wouldn't be where we are if someone never spoke up. And this could be in simple ways, in terms of if you're in a meeting and a woman did not get a chance to get her voice heard, or her opinion was, pushed to the side, is to speak up and defend. And as women, we also need to mentor each other and support each other when it comes to men as well, and support diverse teams and empower, especially I think, the next generation to foster more inclusive workplaces, that we can do as much as we can, but the next generation also, we need to set the pace for them and support them to make, productive change for the future. And as leaders, a lot of it falls on them as well to take charge, and as Matisse says, to walk the talk, to do what needs to be done, and to show that you are the person who is leading the charge, and that will encourage other people in your organizations, other people in society to step forward. And as women, we really need that support and that leadership as well.
Amazing. Well said in closing, Krista. And so many excellent thoughts shared here. I won't attempt to summarize them. We do have our Q&A coming up, and I'll throw to that in a second. I'll just leave my last comment to the attendees. You've taken time out of your very busy day to attend this panel and conversation, which means, this topic is on your radar. And what I heard and the energy I felt from listening to this panel was one of empowerment, one of a lot of work to do, but one of a lot of possibility. And I think that it's important that we take some of our attention and turn it towards spending and engaging in forums like this, because it really gives us both motivation and insight and direction towards working towards these aims. So really pleased to have had this opportunity to celebrate International Women's Day with this group here. Thank you to the panelists. And now I'll hand it over to Michael to take some audience questions.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you to our speakers for some amazing insights. Definitely, so a lot of takeaways. And going back to the power of communications, we as communications professionals are change makers, and communication can heal, communication can support, it can teach, and the possibilities are really endless. So thank you for this really authentic, informative, and engaging conversation. I have a few questions coming in so far. This one's going to go to Matisse. In terms of increasing accessibility to information, can you recommend a specific resource that outlines best practices?
That is a great question. So it really depends on what area of accessibility we're discussing. So if it's website, if it's documents, if it's social media, if it's video, if it's podcasting, each one has their own. A great resource for videos and podcasting would be AMI, or Accessible Media Inc. They have a great how-to guide on how to create both integrated described and post-production described videos, which it's the description and how you are communicating in your actual video. So whether you have a secondary audio layer or it's integrated, that's a great resource for that. For web accessibility, it would be the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. You're going to be looking at WCAG 2.1, which is the newest version, and you're aiming to go for a AA level AA grade on all your web content. For document accessibility, that's a bit trickier. There are some resources, none of them are, let's say, this most specific resource or a go-to to outline the best practices, but LinkedIn Learning has some great resources through Chad Chelius, who does PDF accessibility, which is fantastic. For social media, I've written a couple of posts as well for The Communicator, IBC Toronto's Communicator magazine, that I can share the links to, or you can simply just add me onto LinkedIn and we can chat and I'll find you the specifics that you're looking for. Because I could go on.
Well, thank you, Matisse. And should anybody be interested, I will do a shameless plug for Matisse. She will be presenting, putting the A in IDEA at the World Conference in New York City that's happening in June. And I've had the pleasure of seeing some of Matisse's presentations, and wow, you will have pages and pages of notes, and it is such an important part of our work as communications professionals to ensure that we're providing accessible content. The next one goes over to Krista. Before I ask the question, I want to just remind our audience members, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section, and our team behind the scenes will send them over to me to make sure that we can answer them. So Krista, how do you try to advance equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility for women with minority groups in your communications role at the University of Waterloo?
When it comes to my organization, that there is so much going on right now, trying to change processes, trying to change so much to make it more inclusive and equitable. And as much as possible, I try to get involved in a bunch of working groups, working on inclusive communication style guides, working with different groups when it comes to training. And even on my own team now, we've also developed a document that we call our EDI considerations, for example, that we kind of have bullet points that we must all be mindful of when we're working on our stories, when we're working on our content. Some of that includes making sure that we are interviewing for our stories and our videos very diverse people, making sure that we're now including gender pronouns, that when we're interviewing people that we're asking them, we're including it in the story as long as they're comfortable. Making sure images are very diverse, making sure that people's voices are being heard, that they're comfortable, that they're getting the chance to say and share what they want to say as well. So that is some of the things that we as communicators can make a difference. I know a lot of people are talking about, the DEI space, but how does DEI and communications interact with each other? And it's not a lot of knowledge out there on the internet right now. It's something that we're all learning and that we're all developing in different ways. But these are some of the quick tips that we can do. And some of what the Matisse work does is, making sure that everything on our web pages are accessible, making sure our videos have transcripts. It's really simple things that we can do and support in change management for organizations. And I think as communicators, that's really where we play a role, is that we help to amplify all these voices.
Absolutely. And I want to just thank the team at the IDEA Committee as well. You have been an invaluable resource to the board of directors and our volunteers to ensure that we are being as inclusive as possible and adhering to industry standards, and acting as a model for other chapters worldwide to follow these best practices. So thank you for the important work that each and every one of you are doing. And I will ask Loretta to chime in.
Yeah, I want to jump in here because I'm actually sitting on the board of the York University as well, the Board of Governors. And I actually am very pleased to see that they walk the talk by demonstrating inclusive and diversity at the board level. They have actually embraced a lot of different kind of people on the at the board level. And also for communications, I actually noticed that they not only have dedicated efforts and resources to communication, internal, external audiences, but also they will profile like students or staff or any projects they have with the different communities and share the stories about how York University actually walking the talk of like being inclusive and diverse. So I think that's is also a part they can play in terms of communications.
Perfect, thank you. I think this goes nicely into the next question. And I'll open this to the group, and whoever would like to respond, please go ahead. But how do we involve our employees from underrepresented groups without making them feel tokenized?
I'll take a first stab at that. I think that the first thing that we can do is stepping forward in conversation from a humble place and saying, look, we haven't done this historically well as an organization. To move forward, we really need the participation of all of our employees, but specifically in support of underrepresented employees, and how can we move the conversation forward and who would like to get involved. I know as a Indigenous, BIPOC, cis woman, I am passionate about a lot of things, and if my organization put out that call, I would get involved immediately because it's something I feel strongly about. And I'll just put myself out there and say, I think a lot of underrepresented communities feel very passionate about the different intersecting lenses of their lives and would more than happily participate in conversations, but it's how organizations approach them. And if they have the right spirit of humbleness and really wanting to create systemic change, people will answer the call. So I'll kick that to someone else in the team, but I think that's a good starting point.
Did anybody else want to, Krista, over to you.
Yeah, I think in organizations, we need to recognize too that a lot of this work is paid work. There needs to be defined roles in your organization dedicated to doing this work because, you know, as the woman in the IDEA committee will tell you, it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience to do this work. It's really time consuming. It is something that as change managers, it's going to take a while. So it's best if you have people who are dedicated to doing that, whether it's a specific DEI role or whether you allow time in their regular work hours for them to do, you know, this work that you guys want done in your organization. I think that is very important.
Great. And we have a question on this front. Is there any certification on inclusivity, diversity, equity, and accessibility that we can obtain as communications professionals? And I will throw that to the group for anybody to answer. Matisse.
So I completed the Cornell University Certificate on Diversity Inclusion, which was about 3 months long. It was all online. I found that very, very useful myself as I was entering more, not just accessibility, but the full IDEA concept. For anybody who's interested in the accessibility component, there is the Accessible Media Productions program through Mohawk College in Hamilton, which is completely online. And it takes you through everything you need to know around accessibility, from legislation, healthcare models, all the way to making your content fully accessible.
All right, perfect. And Krista, over to you.
And I also took a certification that was 9 months long from the Canadian Centre for Diversity. It's leadership and inclusion. So it's not communication specific, but it does give you a good foundation in terms of strategy, because I mean, as communicators, we are highly involved in the strategy in a lot of our organizations as well. So that is a good foundations course as well. But yeah, there is not a specific communications aspect to it.
Thank you. Loretta. Oh, sorry, Loretta, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I also have been searching certification in that area in the last 2 years. I haven't been able to find any dedicated communications, but like Matisse, I also joined Cornell One. And I think that those diversity inclusion certificate program can give you a basis of understanding like how to be inclusive, for instance, like using inclusive language. They will actually share that kind of information as well. And the next thing is actually, I would say that connect with IABC, because I'm sure that in the coming future, we're going to have a lot of tips and also like strategy and tactics to provide our members about like how to be inclusive and diverse, and like how to make communication part of the inclusive and diversity strategy. So stay tuned, I would say.
Absolutely. Thank you, Loretta. That's a great point. There are, we have our local IDEA committee. There is a international D&I committee as well, and definitely lots of editorial in our Catalyst magazine and podcasts and so on and so forth. So definitely some great resources there. We have time for one more question before we wrap things up. I feel like we just sat down to start the conversation. This time has flown. What are some strategies for building and working with diverse teams? Loretta.
I see that it's very important, like from my experience with a lot of corporate clients, it has to start from the top. We have to have senior leaders really start the conversation and really committed to making a long-term commitment on building a diversity and inclusive culture. And they have to dedicate resources, because you have to engage people, you have to maybe you need to hire external resources as well, because it's not an HR issue anymore. It's not HR compliance anymore. It's a whole, it is actually like an overall business strategy that you have to incorporate diversity and inclusion in your business strategy. It become a core part of your strategy. It's not just like a piecemeal solution. So it has to engage people across the board and top down. So it has to start from the senior leaders, and they have to be determined to succeed. And by leading by example, and also assigned resources and budget to do that.
Those are some really great points. Thank you. Did anybody else want to close this off? Krista.
I think a lot of it also comes down to sharing the information with the public, like being very transparent on your websites. It helps in your recruitment. For example, like Gen Z, which is the next generation entering the workforce, they're going to be the most diverse group to ever enter the workforce in human history. And we have to be prepared for them in various ways. To recruit them, that diversity is very important to them right now. And that is something that they are looking for in organizations. So if you do want that next generation of talent, DEI is something that you will have to show in your job descriptions, you'll have to show on your website, and then you will have to walk the talk to keep them there, because retaining them is going to be a lot different than it comes to other generations. And I think that is very important for next steps. And I am 100% behind the fact that they are going to be way more diverse than ever before. And I think that's a trend that will only continue to grow.
Thank you. All right, so I'd like to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy day and for sharing your extremely valuable insights and for joining us. To our attendees, thank you for joining us as well. We hope that you enjoyed this very important conversation. You'll be receiving a survey shortly, and we hope that you'll take 2 minutes to provide us with some feedback on this session, the speakers, and any upcoming events that you'd like to see for professional development. And before you go, I just wanted to highlight that IABC Toronto is hosting a virtual fireside chat tomorrow at 6 p.m. on Zoom for IABC members to drop by and learn about exciting volunteer opportunities that are available, which also includes IDEA committee members. So if you go to toronto.iabc.to, you can register to get the link tomorrow. It's just a casual drop-in session. Pour a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and come ask some questions. We can talk about your trajectory as a volunteer, or if you're interested in joining the board of directors for the next term as well. There's a lot of opportunity during our 80th anniversary. So we'd love for you to join us. And come see if IABC is the right fit for you, and have a great rest of your day and stay safe. Thank you very much.